How's it going, YouTube Convention? Today is another video, and today, guys, what the bring to you is going to be the YCS meta analysis, and I do hope that you enjoyed today's video because there's going to be a lot to talk about. The past couple days for me have been really rocky. I was really sick ever since the YCS, and then my power cut off from the storm, and I was mid-video, and then it got corrupted, so it's just been a whole ordeal, but I do appreciate all of you for being here. Looking back at the event now, there were so many different tech options that people were on, and I really want to explain today why people were using those tech options, and then also talk about some really important interactions that you really have to know moving forward. So if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperium Duels to Dragon Shield or Gem, definitely go ahead and do so. And without further ado, let's hop right on into our first topic. So the first thing that I want to talk about is going to be a really important interaction with Lady Labyrinth of the Silver Castle. Now this is pertaining to win versus if. If you read the last line of Lady Labyrinth, it reads, when a normal trap is activated, quick effect, you can set one normal trap from your deck with a different name. This is going to be really important because of the word when. This works exactly like a Paleo trying to reborn itself from the graveyard and Titan's effect. Because if you have a normal trap activated on the board like Compulse, and then you chain Cross out, banishing, I don't know, like Call by the Grave, right? It doesn't really matter. Then your opponent never gets a window to use Lady Labyrinth's effect. And that's really important. And of course, it's not something that they have to use at that point, so they can always activate another one, then use the effect. But if there's only like one card on the board and they need to get another trap set, maybe like an Eradicator or something, you can really cut off access to that by just knowing this very simple trick to just chain whatever you can to the activation of the trap card. And that's going to be huge moving forward because this is going to be a really prominent matchup that you'll face at every locals event that you go to. It's going to be a really popular deck. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be Expulsion. Now this card's actually just wild, being able to summon a floodgate that doesn't even activate, which is pretty insane. Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, when it hits your opponent's board, they cannot summon anything else except Gimmick Puppets. Now that's pretty wild because of the fact that who plays Gimmick Puppets, you know? So the only real counter that you have to this is going to be using a Bystial or like DD Crow on one of the targets of Expulsion if one of them is still in graveyard, because Expulsion has to summon both targets. So if you banish one, your opponent is not going to be able to resolve the Expulsion. The card will move location, and then it will not be that target or that card anymore. And then the Expulsion again will just resolve without effect. That's going to be really important, and we've already seen a lot of people talking about Bystials or Crow in the sideboard for branded because of this interaction specifically. Nightmare is a pretty crazy card, and you really don't want it dropped on you, because if you're going into games 2 or even game 3 when it really matters and you really want to be able to win that match, you need an answer for this card. Now if your opponent has Mirror Jade and like another monster on board, you can always go player priority, draw off a super poly your opponent, and then they can't tribute a fusion, which is really nice too, and that's something to also keep in mind. But for the more realistic situation, your opponent's probably just passing on Mirror Jade, using Expulsion. You really want to make sure that you have a Bystial or DD Crow to be able to answer this interaction. The next thing is going to be really cool in the branded sideboard. I thought this was so based at the YCS. So that's going to be deployment into Aqua Neos, into Aqua Dolphin. And this is going to be really cool because it's going to be able to stop cards like Ash Blossom, and that's really going to be detrimental to the branded strategy. So of course, being able to utilize cards like Fusion Deployment more in the deck, this card has become imperative to include at 3. And playing 40 cards now I feel like is more important than ever, because if you see branded Fusion, you typically also want to make sure that you see deployment, because this card is just so good. Being able to at least extend your plays by summoning Cartesia and then going into things like the Dusk Dragon or even the Rinworm, and those cards are really good too, because even if you get like Nibiru, they're still in your graveyard, they still do a lot. So I like this interaction a lot. I thought this was really smart, and moving forward I'm sure we'll see this a lot. The next thing is talking about the Lock and Catch Tira. Ogre is a really crazy card. You're probably realistically never actually hand trapping this, but the way that the lock works is going to be adding Big Bang after you summon the Ogre, and then you'll be able to use Tear Cash or Scareclaw Cash in your hand to go ahead and banish Big Bang, which will then get you the body from Tear Cash or Scareclaw Cash, then also using Big Bang effect to go ahead and summon back one of the materials from Shangri-La. Then usually in this part you've never even used Birth yet, so you get a lot of monsters on board, the double Shangri-La and then also Diabolos, which does lead lead to the full lock of your opponent's board. Pretty crazy. You can always bell the effect of Tier Cash or Scareclaw Cash. You're probably still just using Nibiru on Diabolos to do the safest play. Then also Imperm on Unicorn is probably still the better play. But in the future, just kind of keep this in mind too, that Ogre, it can be pretty insane, especially if you see them search like Tier Cash or Scareclaw Cash, because usually this is what's coming next. But moving away from this, we're going to talk about some of the tech options that we saw this weekend. And yes, that is an Eagle Booster that you see. People were playing this like Summon a Rise Heart in the EMZ, set Eagle Booster and passed because they knew if they protected a Rise Heart that they would just auto win a lot of games because D-Shifter is D-Shifter. And I think that's really crazy too, because we did see this even in our matchups. But at the same point, I think it might be a little copium using Eagle Booster. It's a cool idea. And it's really funny because Kashtira plays a lot like Zodiac. Having a Rise Heart that's just Dryden, having the Moth in your extra deck that's just Borbo, Fenrir is Broad Bull, and then you have Birth, which is essentially Chakanine. So definitely really cool, the different things that we're seeing people come up with. I know that I talked a lot with Justin Singh over the weekend. Shout out to him. We talked a lot, and I ended up playing Econ at 2, 3 Book of Moon, and then I only played 1 Eclipse for the crossout target. I really don't like Eclipse as a card because I really don't want to trade my board for just booking 1 monster, especially if they have like the extender too. Having the 1-for-1 trade with Book of Moon was absolutely insane. Summon a Unicorn, book the Unicorn. They go like summon Fenrir with like an extender or something, right? And then you just go a Rise Heart Banish, and then you just win the game. So that's pretty crazy, and I think that Book of Moon is just such a more versatile 1-for-1. I thought Book of Eclipse was really cool, just for a couple different reasons, like Nibiru, because if your board gets booked, or if your opponent like Eclipse you, and then your board's just face down, and then they extend past 5, you can Nibiru them, and then your board gets flipped back up anyways if they book you. If you book yourself, of course, that you have to manually flip them on your turn, but if your opponent does it, then of course you get free draws on top of clearing their board as well. So definitely a lot of really cool ups and downs with playing Eclipse, but I think that Book of Moon overall was just the better trade. We did see a lot of people on Chalice and Lance. I think Lance goes a bit harder this format just because of Labyrinth as well. Just gives you a lot of flexibility to keep your monster on board and unaffected by those spells and traps. Moving forward, though, I do think that Diabolos is the problem card. I said this before the ban list. It should have been preemptively hit. Locking zones is kind of crazy, and this is something that definitely should have been dealt with, and it probably will get dealt with, but how fast, I don't really know. I don't really think that we'll see an E-ban list. I think that it'd be really interesting, though, because Tier got hit super hard, which I don't think that it should have been hit like that, but it was because a lot of people viewed the deck as toxic. A lot of people view this deck as toxic because it locks out all of your zones. I don't really know what's going to happen, but I do think that we will see a hit to Diabolos rather soon because this card's pretty crazy. And we all knew one day that this card would end up being an issue just because of the way that the effects work in here, being able to banish cards out of your opponent's deck face down. Usually getting all your zones locked and like half of your deck banished face down is not a really interactive way to play the game. So the next thing I want to talk about is going to be the recycled format that we're in. Yeah, it feels a lot like May format last year because we have Branded, we have Sword Soul. Yeah, we have Bystials and Kashtira, but nothing really feels new. I just really want the power level of the game to rise to like better decks, because if Tier taught us anything, it's that the decks that we use right now are like Tier 2, Tier 3. They're not really that crazy. If you look at Branded losing to an Ash Blossom and having to pass sometimes, that's kind of wild because that was unheard of in Tier, you know? So, I don't know. I think that it'd be really cool to see like 4 or 5 decks that are like Tier and just kind of see how much interaction we can get out of that. Because playing in a hand trap format, especially like when one hand trap can just make you pass, isn't the most fun, nor is it really good for a competitive scene. So definitely want to see what happens moving forward and the power level of the decks that we get in the future. The next thing is that Bystials are kind of gone right now. Maybe we start seeing a bit more to go ahead and counter things like Expulsion, but Bystials are still really crazy cards, and I'm sure that there will be a resurgence at some point, being really amazing cards against decks like Mathmech, Branded. I'm sure that there's going to be other decks in the future that Bystials are also really crazy against, so we'll just have to wait and see. But as of right now, I feel like this is a reason why we're seeing a lot of Drytron and a lot of other decks coming back, because of the fact that there's not really any Ishizu cards. There's not really any Bystials. Shout out to John Wilkin too. If you look at his list from the YCS, there's only 1 Lubellion and 1 Saronir. And it's just really interesting to see like how fast Bystials fell out of the format. But they're still really crazy cards. So I'm sure that we will see them back at full capacity. But as of right now, they seem to be missing. The next thing I want to mention is going to be something that I've been thinking about now for a couple weeks, ever since we started hearing about different things that you could do with Thrust. But I think that using Thrust to get into cards like Herald of the Abyss is kind of insane, especially if we start getting into like another Towers format. The Herald of the Abyss reads, pay 1500, declare one monster type and attribute. The opponent must send one face-up monster with the declared type and attribute from their field to the graveyard, if possible. For the rest of this turn, your opponent cannot activate the effects of monsters with that sent monster's name. So this affects the player and not the card. So if they have like an Adagnister Towers and you activate Herald, you can make your opponent send it to the graveyard. Of course, if there's like another monster that matches the monster type and attribute on their board, then they can just send that. But usually that's just never the case. So if they have like a Punisher on board, like some monster that's just unaffected, you can use Thrust to get into Abyss and just outright clear the towers, which is amazing. I think this is a really important interaction that you should at least keep in your back pocket for the future, and maybe pick up a copy of Herald of the Abyss. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already checked out my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, definitely go ahead and do so. If you want a coaching session over on Metafy, definitely let me know. And if you have any questions, PM me on Discord. I hope that everyone has a wonderful night, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thank you.